Hello and welcome to another episode of the Power Panel. Today we will be talking about science-backed nutrition for healthy aging. And before we get started and talk to our lovely guest, I wanted to mention that today's Power Panel is brought to you by Myos MD, the cutting-edge nutritional supplement designed to combat muscle loss and support healthier aging. The supplement is powered by fortotropin, which is a natural bioactive compound clinically shown to enhance muscle growth and reduce anabolic resistance. If you'd like to learn more about Myos MD and the way that we are changing the way that we look at muscle health, please visit myosmd.com to learn more. All right, so to today's episode, we have Lisa Andrews, functional nutritionist. Lisa, if you could share a little bit about your journey as a registered dietitian and what inspired you to focus on making nutrition science accessible to everyone.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you so much, Swati. Well, I guess my nutritional journey really started at home with my parents. My father was a person with diabetes for a long time. He had probably every complication known to man, including kidney disease, high blood pressure, heart disease. So he was always on some type of modified diet. And then I grew up with very strong diet culture. My mother was always on some type of weight loss regime. And I was an athlete in high school. And so I knew that I would probably go into something health related, but nutrition was always sort of top of my list because I was always sort of surrounded by it.
Yeah, that makes sense. And currently in your practice, you work extensively with patients over 40. So what would you say are some of the biggest nutritional challenges that this demographic faces, and how can we help address them?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, people over 40 are sort of in that sandwich generation, no pun intended, where they're taking care of their own families, they're taking care of their aging parents, and a lot of time they're relying on convenience food. So, my goal is at least to get them sort of back in the kitchen and, using less processed foods, making sure that they're focusing on fruits and vegetables and fiber, but also getting enough protein to support their muscle mass. These are the sort of ages where people start to discover that they have prediabetes or their cholesterol is higher than usual, or they're starting, for women, they're starting to get into that perimenopause stage where their periods are kind of wonky and they're putting on weight. So, weight management is also a concern at that age.
Definitely. And it's never too late to start integrating, whether it's more fruits, more vegetables, more whole grains into your diet. So
Definitely.
And you're known for translating complex nutrition science into practical advice. So what are your go-to strategies for making nutrition approachable for patients, particularly those who are, experimenting with a new transition or with a transition in life, or they're, experimenting with including new foods into their diet?
Yeah. I really want to start people where they are rather than taking everything away and sort of having this quote, clean slate. Let's see what they're already eating that they can keep in their diet. And also I want to respect their culture, their time, their skill set, their budget, their food preferences, their food tolerances and intolerances. So if I have somebody that, maybe I recommend the DASH diet, which is, dietary approaches to stop hypertension, and they hear, okay, well, I need potassium, but I hate bananas. I'm not going to push bananas. I'm going to say, well, what else could you eat that would be high in potassium that would be enjoyable? And I think that's one thing that I want to kind of encourage with people is that food should be enjoyable. It shouldn't be punitive. So if you have to, plug your nose to swallow something, let's find something else to eat. So I really try to put things into perspective of, you can do that super restrictive keto diet, but how long are you really going to do it? And is that going to work for you long term when you love potatoes or you love fruit or whatever the food is?
Definitely. And that personalized approach is what is so important. As an integrative pharmacist, I feel like that whole person personalized approach is so important because, you can tell someone, it's time for you to start, incorporating more movement or something. And, if they, already are leading a different type of lifestyle, and that would be such a change. thinking about where they are and how we can make it something that they're excited to do.
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
And make it easy. Make it reasonable and sustainable, and not something that's completely out of their wheelhouse that they're just going to shut down and say, I'm not going to do that right away.
Yeah, and I love that you brought up the kind of and versus the instead. So it's
Right.
like, what more can you add to your diet versus,
Right.
what can you replace or remove from your diet, which I think is
Right.
such a mindset shift.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Great. Yeah. And so, as per, we were talking a little bit about, your practice, you also incorporate functional nutrition. And so I would love to talk a
Mhm.
little bit about what's functional nutrition, first and foremost, for those
Mhm.
of you who are listening who haven't heard of it. And also, what are functional foods?
Yeah. Functional nutrition really looks at some of the nutrients that are going to be the best for overall health. So we're looking at things like fiber, antioxidants, prebiotics, probiotics, and even supplements themselves, over the counter things like vitamin D or selenium or B12. Those can also be considered functional ingredients. So I try to sort of lead with a plant-based approach, even though I'm not vegetarian or vegan. I really encourage more plants in people's diets because there's so many different properties of plants and phytochemicals and fiber and antioxidants and polyphenols that we don't even have. I mean, there's so much research on them, and then there's so much more research that we can be doing on them. But we know that, the more plants that you have in your diet, usually the lower your mortality and the better, you're better off in the long run. Better brain health, better heart health, reduced risk of obesity, diabetes, all those things that get all of us in the end.
Oh my gosh, you're speaking my language. I have so many, follow-up questions like, because I want to nerd out about this stuff. But just, for people who don't know the difference between a prebiotic, a probiotic, and a postbiotic, could you break that down for everyone?
Yeah, so prebiotic is really sort of the food that it fuels the probiotics. So things like inulin, chicory root, which are certain fibers, and those don't necessarily have to be taken. They could be taken as a supplement, or they could just be found in natural foods like onions and bananas and garlic. And then probiotics are just those that healthy bacteria that thrives in your gut. So things like lactobacillus. That's the one that comes to mind immediately. So those are the types of foods, like fermented foods, that I'm going to encourage in people's diets. So kombucha, sauerkraut, if they can handle the salt, miso, definitely yogurt, which is affordable and accessible for most people.
Yes. And then you also mentioned, the more plant-rich approach. And so, thinking about not being necessarily vegetarian or vegan, but incorporating more plants. And so
Mhm.
I love talking about phytochemicals. So I would love for you to talk about, what's like one of the most like underrated phytochemicals that, like you think more people should be getting in their diet.
Well, I would say probably the chemicals that are found in cabbage-based food. So brassica vegetables, broccoli, cabbage, kale, any of those, those really hardy greens, Swiss chard, spinach, anything green and leafy. I'm always pushing greens. And, like one of my simple hacks is just to rip up a lot of spinach and, add it to your leftovers or add it to your eggs or put it in your soup or chop it up and put it into rice or other grains, because that way you're just adding more volume and color and phytochemicals and nutrients to the food, but not necessarily more, calories or carbohydrates if you're concerned with that sort of thing. So anywhere you can sneak in, vegetables, anywhere you can sneak in more beans. So there's lots of really good nutrients in things like lentils and black beans and red beans that, I want to encourage people to eat more of.
Yeah, and I love a tip or like other tips and tricks like that too, like just adding, greens wherever you can, and especially like when you're not even thinking about it, like putting it in eggs,
Yeah.
especially so simple, or in a smoothie, things like that.
Mhm.
Do you have any other like tips and tricks that you would recommend to just add those additional phytochemicals in?
I'm a big fan of orange and lemon zest. So I'll use that in things like oatmeal or I'll use it in quinoa. So a lot of people will use quinoa in like a cold salad or as a side dish, but it's really great in the winter as breakfast. So you can add things like ginger and turmeric and cinnamon, a little bit of lemon zest or orange zest to season things. So those are just little tweaks that I like to make just to make the food more interesting and tasty, and then add some nutrition without it feeling like, oh, I'm eating a giant bowl of kale again. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
definitely.
yeah,
And
just
also
learning to
adding some
use.
fiber. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Mhm. Great.
Yeah.
Right, wow. And then one of the initiatives that you've, worked on is called Let Us Beat Hunger. And in this, you've made an impact on addressing food insecurity. So I'd love to talk a little bit about, that aspect of your practice.
Yeah. So I started, I don't know when I started this, probably about 7 years ago, I started writing food puns. And I really wanted to make part of the sales go back to programs that support food insecurity. So things that offer nutrition education or nutrition counseling, or just programs for people to learn how to cook, because I really think that we need to take health in our own hands. But like for healthcare providers, there's literally two questions that they can ask their clients, if they are food insecure. So two questions that they can ask are, within the past 12 months, we worried whether our food would run out before we got money to buy more, yes or no. So that's one question. And then another one is just within the past 12 months, the food we bought just didn't last and we didn't have money to get more, yes or no. So those are two questions, and they're 97% accurate, which is pretty high percentage. But those are a couple questions that healthcare providers can ask their patients about food insecurity. To me, we have so much food in this country, but so much of it is wasted. And then we have so many people suffering from food insecurity, which impacts everything. It impacts, particularly children. They can't learn because their brains aren't being fueled. They don't have energy. It's linked with depression. It's linked with heart disease. So food access is very important to me, especially now with
Yeah.
this administration. But
Yes,
we'll go there.
absolutely. Yeah, and it's something that's so important, and we need to look at food as fuel. In the way you talked about, I think is so important. And
Yeah.
as you're thinking about your patient population, so in general, people over 40, what are some of the most important dietary changes that they can make to support energy, support overall health, and continue to think of food as fuel?
Yeah. So I'll definitely emphasize the importance of plants and fiber, because gut health becomes a little wonky as people get older, because they're a little bit more likely to recognize that they have like IBS or gallbladder disease or constipation or just different issues like that. So encouraging more fiber for both men and women. The other thing is getting enough protein in their diet. Particularly, I know you're very interested in muscle health. And so you want to make sure that you're getting adequate protein at really most of your meals and snacks, because it impacts satiety. And, as we get older, we don't need as many calories because we're just not as active and our metabolism naturally slows down. So, just reducing things like added sugar, cutting back on alcohol, because we know there's definitely a connection between alcohol and the risk for cancer and alcohol and the risk for dementia. And so I don't want to be this teetotaler and say, oh, I never have a glass of wine or something like that. But I feel like when it comes to nutrition, people are either on one extreme or the next. They're either super, super, super restrictive, or they're just way over the top extreme. And that's not a recipe for health. We need to kind of fall somewhere in the middle where, we're okay with what we're eating. It makes us feel good. It gives us energy. And we still enjoy it, but it's not this like mindset of I can never have this or that, or I'm just going to go full hog and forget about it. So it's tricky.
Yeah, and with these extremes, there's so much misinformation about nutrition out there. So,
Yeah.
how do you help patients focus on evidence-based practices that can truly, improve their health?
Yeah. So there's lots of great nonprofits like, the American Diabetes Association, the American Heart Association, the Arthritis Foundation that have sound information. I typically try to steer my clients towards, evidence-based practice. So look at the Cleveland Clinic, or look at Harvard, or look at university-based guidelines, and not just an influencer on what I call TikToxic. The other thing is look for the RD credential. I mean, look for credentialed practitioners, look for pharmacists, look for physicians, look for dietitians, because we're more science-based. We're going to give you science. We're not just going to tell you something that's trendy. Even though some of those trends might have some merit, for me, I really want to see like how much science is in here, how much truth is in there, and does it apply to you? I mean, so many of these things get blown up in the news, and it might be a rat study on 18 rats. Well, I'm not a rat, so what value is that to me? So I really sort of push the science. I'm a very big science nerd.
Yes, definitely. And so speaking of trends and fads, like which ones do have merit in your opinion?
I would say, intermittent fasting has been, shown to have some benefit, particularly for people with prediabetes or glucose intolerance, or overweight and obesity. But it's not the end all be all diet, because on the flip side, skipping breakfast puts people at higher risk for heart disease. So it depends on, your situation. I really think that personalizing nutrition is the way to go. So, we're looking at things like nutrigenomics, where we're getting a genetic profile on people and finding out, well, maybe a lower carb diet would be beneficial for you. And this is how to do it without cutting things out completely.
Yeah.
Other trends, I mean, all the functional nutrition that you mentioned, mushrooms aren't going anywhere. Green leafy vegetables aren't going anywhere. Lentils and beans aren't going anywhere. So I think those still have some merit, but we still need more research, just like any other science.
And by mushrooms, do you mean like shiitake mushrooms, or do you mean more the functional mushrooms?
Well, shiitake is actually included in some of
Oh, that's
those,
true. Yeah.
functional mushrooms. So, I always sort of have a food first approach, but then, there are things like mushroom coffees that, do have, I mean,
Chaga,
the mushrooms
reishi,
themselves have the research, the coffees probably have some functional, ingredients as well. So we just kind of have to look at it as a whole, but I like to start with food first.
Yes, that makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense. And then, with all of these fads and trends, some having merit and some maybe not having as much merit or not being based in science, what strategies have you found to be effective for encouraging patients to adopt and stick to healthy, consistent eating habits?
Yeah. Well, again, I'll go back to what they know and love to eat, and what they're comfortable eating and can afford. And again, if it's something like, I don't know, there was that big cottage cheese ice cream phase for a while, and if I have somebody that's maybe lactose intolerant or just really hates the consistency of it, I'm not gonna push that type of thing. The other thing is, I have, and I love this, I have very curious clients. And so if they're open to it, I'll send them abstracts, I'll send them articles, I'll send them summaries. But sometimes I need to sort of, I don't want to say de-science it, but just put it into practical terms to say that this is what this means. The thing that you're suggesting may or may not be beneficial to you. And so that's what you have to kind of look at.
Yes, that makes sense. And, we've been talking so much about the personalization, the importance of individualizing, nutrition strategies for everyone. But are there, two or three, things that you would recommend for nearly everyone? I know we talked about, green leafy vegetables. We talked about, increasing fiber, adequate protein intake. But are there like other things that are just generally good for most people?
I would say water, because we forget about water so much. To just start with water as soon as you wake up. With it's just 16 ounces of water, start with that. And then if you need your coffee or tea to perk you up, that's totally fine. But don't forget to stay hydrated. So, because we can encourage lots of fiber, but if somebody doesn't have enough water, then they have the opposite effect. The other thing is pay attention to, your hunger cues. And I'll typically ask, especially people that are, emotional eaters, or they're trying to manage their weight or their blood sugar, and they recognize that they need to eat less, but they don't really know how to stop. I'll really kind of ask them, what's eating you that's making you eat? So pay attention to your mood, pay attention to if you're tired, if you're bored, if you're angry, if you're upset, or even if you're happy. I mean, we eat for many, many reasons beyond just fueling our bodies. And so, just to recognize, oh, I'm stressed out or I'm bored, and that's why I'm eating. And so is it hunger or is it habit? So always sort of put yourself in that mindset. I mean, those are probably my two biggies. I definitely encourage breakfast because I think it just starts your day off on the right foot. Make sure you're including some protein. Try not to eat something too sugary or sweet in the morning, because it just triggers you to want more. Sugar sort of begets sugar. It just makes you want more sugar later.
And so what do you say to people who are like, oh, I don't wake up hungry, or, oh, I don't crave, eating something in the morning? What do you suggest for people like that?
I guess I would say try to have something within a few hours, even if you're not like ravenous when you wake up. At least try to hydrate and get something, within a few hours. I think the other thing is to pay attention to what you may be eating the night before. So for people that are eating really close to bedtime, or maybe they wake up in the middle of the night and they eat, that's probably why they're not hungry in the morning. So I've had a lot of clients that, once we pull through their diet history, and I'll say, well, you're eating at 9 o'clock at night and then you go to bed at 11, you might not be hungry in the morning. So let's see if you can scale back that evening snack to kind of reset your appetite.
And, there are different schools of thought about this, but would love to hear your perspective. Are you prefer like larger meals and smaller snacks? Are you like, snack throughout the day? Like, what do you suggest for people who, are potentially looking to, manage their weight, maintain their weight, or maybe even lose weight?
Yeah. I mean, I think everybody's individual. So there's not a one size all approach. Personally, I think it's probably better to have at least 3 meals, or at least 2 meals and a handful of snacks, so that your body always has some energy. But that being said, you also want to recognize, if I'm eating like every 1 or 2 hours, it's probably not due to hunger. It's probably due to something else. So I would say try to space your meals out at least 4 hours, so that your body has time to use some calories in storage, particularly if you are trying to lose weight. And also just to, give your body a rest. You don't want to keep just dumping more and more food into your digestive tract without it being able to process everything. So, and again, pay attention to hunger or, habit, or, especially for people that are working in offices that, people bring in food, or, they order in food, or they bring in their half a birthday cake, or they bring in their cookies and all those sorts of things. There's lots of temptations around. So you kind of have to either, build in your own snacks, like bring your own things from home, or just stay out of the break room. Just hard sometimes.
Yes, definitely. And, as we're coming to a close on our time together, could you share one piece of advice that can help healthcare providers, especially as they're looking to guide their patients towards better nutrition?
Mm-hmm. I would say partner with dietitians. This is our field. I mean, you wouldn't hire an electrician to do plumbing work. So, find the expert. The other thing is, dietitians work in different areas of nutrition. So not everybody works with pediatrics, and not everybody works with eating disorders. So, when healthcare practitioners are interviewing dietitians, ask them, who are your preferred clients? Who do you have the most experience with? Because sometimes people will hang out their shingle as a pregnancy expert because they were pregnant at one time. And that's not a good way to look at it. I mean, I went through a pregnancy, and I'm not an expert in pregnancy. I haven't worked with that many pregnant women. So, build a network of people that specialize in different areas, so that you can get the best person for your patients and clients.
And it's all about that collaborative, interdisciplinary care model that I think that we're going towards. Is like
Yeah.
everyone has their set specialty. And if we can, instead of trying to be the jack of all trades, instead, let's think of who else in our network we can, turn to help our patients.
Yeah, definitely. And I always, for me, I have my little, mental Rolodex of who I recommend in my own field. I mean, I don't want to be this silo and not collaborate with other dietitians who are specialized in certain areas. And the same thing with, I'm sure, with pharmacists. I mean, I encourage my patients to ask pharmacists about supplements and drug nutrient interactions and herbal preparations because it's not necessarily my wheelhouse, and that's okay. You don't have to know everything.
Yes, exactly. That you don't need to know everything, but you should know who you can ask or like what
Absolutely.
resources to look at. Yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
agree.
Okay, amazing. So as we wrap up today, we'd like to thank Lisa Andrews for sharing her expertise and for Myos MD for sponsoring today's Power Panel. Again, powered by the revolutionary proprietary ingredient Fortitropin, Myos MD is trusted by healthcare providers nationwide to deliver real results backed by science. If you'd like to learn more, please visit myosmd.com. That's myosmd.com to see a number of videos and recordings like this one with Lisa Andrews today and other experts, and learn how you can bring this powerful solution to your practice too. Alrighty, well, thank you so much for
Yeah, you're
for
welcome.
being here, and looking forward to continuing the conversation offline.
Okay, thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. And if people want to learn, a little bit more about you or follow
Mhm.
what you're doing, where can they do that?
My website is soundbitesnutrition.com, and I am at NutriGirl on most social media channels. So Blue Sky, X, Instagram.
Okay, perfect.
Mhm.
Alrighty, well, until next time, and looking forward to when that will be.
Okay, thanks.
Alrighty, thank you. Have a good week. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
you too. Thank you. Bye bye.